Now, not every acupuncturist knows this, and I've heard some people really push back against it. Well, I didn't know that. And I'm saying, well, isn't it a good thing you came to class then? Well, I've never heard it before. The answer is, if I'm just doing acupuncture for a stiff neck, it doesn't matter what you do, you can stick a needle on a trigger point, that's easy. But if I'm doing something more precise and specific, I make sure that there's no electronics around at all. In fact, it's a lot like when you go into, I've been in literally, I'm not exaggerating, say hundreds of MRI scans for research purposes. So, you go through this entire protocol where you get rid of everything. Well, we do the same thing when we're doing acupuncture or when we're teaching qigong or tai chi. And if you do that, the abilities get much better because good acupuncture is all about the interaction between the therapist and the patient. I also have had this experience so many times of picking stuff up, and people are sometimes quite freaked out by it. How the hell do you know that? Well, sorry, I try not to say things most of the time so I don't freak you out. But of course you pick it up because it's an interaction. And if you're any good at therapy, there's a very interesting area that's not widely known, is that there's actually data on healing that has been collected of all people by drug companies. And that's probably going to shock you because when drug companies are doing double-blind studies, they keep indices of all the centers. And there are some centers that have much higher placebo response rates than others. And so it wasn't that anybody was doing anything fishy, because you can't in the studies. It was because the practitioners in said clinic are super enthusiastic, work very hard, and do a lot of other stuff. But I won't tell you where that particular study center was, where they had 60% placebo response rates. But
you got to tell me. You got to tell me. Maybe
Atlanta,
later.
No, this is public record, so I'm not giving away anything. No, it was our center. And that's why we
our center that had anything to do with Richard Petty, maybe.
Yes.
Welcome to Connecting with Coincidence. I'm a doctor, and every once in a while I get to talk to another physician who's interested in this synchronicity business. And I have the pleasure to do that today with our guest, Richard Petty, who is a guy who knows a lot. And as you'll see from my telling you about his biography, he's been around the world in many different ways, and it's a wonderful thing talking with him. And he's been here before, and he's one of those few physicians that I can talk synchronicity with. And particularly we'll talk about synchronicity and healing, which is the name of a book I helped to edit, but it's also something that needs to be brought more fully into medicine. There's a reluctance to think in this way for various reasons, but it's usually the materialistic bias, but it's more than that. It's just like they don't like thinking differently. I mean, getting physicians to learn about nutrition has still been a major problem. So today we have the pleasure of talking with a man I think is brilliant, who's very careful and, as you'll see, highly opinionated, and he'll be sure to tell you. he'll be sure to tell you because he tells me, which I think is wonderful because he knows what he knows, and he makes that very clear. And so it's a pleasure to have Richard Petty back on the program. So, Richard, I'm going to intro you, and then we'll get started with you. Graduated in medicine from the Royal London Hospital Medical College, University of London. While a student, he developed a deep and abiding interest in the work of Carl Jung and spent 2 years training in psychotherapy. So he's a physician who does psychotherapy or enjoys psychotherapy, learned it. After graduation, he obtained a master's degree in biochemistry, a doctorate in cell biology, and then had to go east and trained in acupuncture and qigong in England, and then in China, and then back in the US. He practiced, researched, and taught internal medicine, endocrinology, metabolic medicine for 14 years, and then said, I think I'll do something else. I'll become a psychiatrist because he's kind of like that anyway. And did training at Bethlem Royal and Maudsley Hospitals in London, and a research fellow. And okay, if you're going to be a psychiatrist these days, go to become a neuroimaging guy. So he went to Johns Hopkins for that in Baltimore. He spent 7 years on the faculty of the University of Pennsylvania and has been a visiting professor, guest lecturer, keynote, workshop leader on every continent, and he's sad to say, except Antarctica.
Ah.
Yeah, well, you can't have them all, Richard. You can't have them all. So I understand there's some civilizations underneath that ice, but they haven't invited you yet. And teaching well-being, healthy aging, spirituality, and methods for increasing energy and resilience. So, Richard, welcome back to Connecting with Coincidence.
Well, thank you very much, Bernie. It's a great pleasure to be back. And as everybody can see, I had a misspent and dissolute youth, which is why I've done all these rather odd things. But it's a great pleasure to be here. As you said, we have a lot of things in common. But first, I'd just like to congratulate you on your new book.
Thank you.
As I think you know, I've actually reviewed it for Amazon. I wrote a lengthy review on it. And I, by the way, gave it 5 stars because I think it's absolutely superb. And I'm not saying that because I'm on your show. It really is. It's a real contribution, and I strongly recommend that people check it out. There's a great deal in there. And actually, what I'd like to do a couple of times as we talk today is also pick up on a couple of things in the book because I read it very carefully. In fact, I read parts of it twice. But I wanted to start with something that I think may actually resonate with you, and I hope with the listeners. Gregory Bateson, you remember the anthropologist, of course, another refugee from, not a barbarian from beyond the Eastern Sea. He once said, the major problems in the world are the result of the differences between how nature works and how people think. And I think that's actually extremely profound because I think a lot of our difficulties and our problems in people individually as well as socially and culturally are because of this complete disconnect, that we've now got into this bizarre situation in which people seem to think that we can understand everything there is to know about the world just using science and using reason. And I'm going to say that we actually need a couple of other things too. We need intuition and also imagination. And I mean imagination with a capital I. I don't mean make-believe. I mean, actually, we need to imagine things. And I think that is hugely important. So what I wanted to ask if I could talk about today is, first of all, what I call special knowing. I've always been extremely interested in the fact that there are some people who seem to know stuff. Shakespeare or Bindu. One I was recently looking at again for another reason was the mathematician Ramanujan. I'm sure you've heard the story. He created somewhere around 3,000 mathematical formulae with no training. And he grew up in a small village. And he believed actually that all of his formulae, everything that he did, was given to him by a goddess. And in the fullness of time, a mathematician in England brought him to Cambridge, and he spent 5 years there. His name was Hardy, and for people who are listening today who remember any genetics, one of the things you learned was the Hardy-Weinberg law of alleles. Well, it was the same Hardy. And he was the fellow who brought Ramanujan over, and they worked together for 7 years. But eventually he was homesick, got physically ill, and went back to India and sadly died when I think he was only about 32 years old. But the fact is, this man produced these extraordinary creative things. And of course, there are many. You could say Mozart would be another example. There are many people like this. But the reason I started thinking about this a lot was that when I was in medical training, and the reason that I put in this odd background of mine is I was extremely interested and learned a great deal from many physicians who had a remarkable ability to pick up stuff about patients. We were right on the cusp of going into scientific medicine with machines and blood tests and everything. Most of the clinicians had trained at times when we didn't have most things. We had x-rays and that was about it. And I'll give a very simple example. I was once going around with a particular physician. He would examine patients. This is how it was done in those days, and he'd have his entourage following him around. And we were just walking out, and he suddenly stopped and said, "There's something else," and walked all the way back to a patient, examined her thyroid, and discovered there was a lump in it. It was invisible from the outside. There was nothing to be seen whatsoever, but he somehow intuitively knew that there was something else. So he went back and found this thing, and we were able to do everything. Shortly thereafter, we used to work these horrendous rosters back in the day. It was every other night and every other weekend, which we did for a year. So you never got out of the hospital. And I came down with something. I'd been in bed all day, had to do rounds in the evening with a mask on, and was completely out of it, and was able to diagnose more than a dozen patients without examining them correctly. And it was all documented and all written down. And this is by no means unique. I'm not the first person to do this. And I think it's just one of those things that can happen. And why it happened on that occasion, well, it was need. And because I was completely out of it, my brain was completely out. I was simply going around and everybody was being extremely nice to me because, I mean, I really had been physically very ill, but there was nobody else to fill in. And so my brain was disengaged, and it therefore became possible to do everything. And, you know, it's a theme that comes up in your book repeatedly. And before I get to my main case of today, it's something that comes up again and again is, as you're describing the events in your life, is when you actually move back and out and stop thinking. And if I could just, without spoiler alert, right at the very beginning, you talk about as a small child, your dog goes missing and you're sobbing and going around trying to find the dog. And you're going hither and yon, and you go somewhere where there's no good reason for the dog to be, but you're sort of sobbing and not thinking, and there you meet your dog. Perfect example. Now, you did that as, how old were you, 8 or 10 or something like that?
8 or 9, yeah.
Yes, small child anyway. And perfect example. If you had been an older adult, what would you have done? You would have got a piece of paper like this, you would have made a grid, and you would have started doing grid exercises to track down the dog. You didn't. You were sobbing and saying, "Where is he?" And you found him.
Yeah.
And that's actually a theme that comes up loads of times in your book, doesn't it?
Yes. Yes, it's I've given it a name of internal GPS,
Yes.
getting to where you need to be without knowing how you got there.
I think, yes, that's quite right. And that, you know, it's something that was very striking several times throughout your accounts, even when you were eventually left your other world behind to go into academia. The way you ran your department was waiting for things to come. Well, I know lots of chairs of departments, because I've been there, done that, get shortlists and everything else and go wandering around the country, or trying to find people that are going to bring in lots of money. And you sort of waited for the great Uli bird in the sky to bring people to you, and it worked.
It really did.
So it's again, I strongly urge people to read some of this, because it's a remarkable account and one you don't often come across. But if I may, I'd just like to give you an example of this clinician knowing, because I think there's loads of examples, but there's several years ago, I was at a meeting in Philadelphia. It was on book marketing. And while I was there, I met a young chiropractor called Brad Nelson and his wife had come to this. He had just written a book called The Emotion Code. His thesis is that a lot of the problems in the world are caused by trapped emotions that are trapped in various parts of the body. And he, interestingly, also didn't take any credit for it. He believed that the good Lord had spoken to him and given him the method. And so he'd written this book and came to Philadelphia to figure out how he could sell it. And he had no resources, but I watched him at work, read his book while I was at this meeting. I was very impressed, and I did everything I could to help him get the word out, because I thought it was very worthy. And so we went on our way and didn't really think any more of it. You know, you have done this 100 times, I'm sure, helping people out if you possibly can. 18 months later, my stepdaughter is a very good and very keen equestrian, and she was in a horse show in Lexington, Kentucky, which is about 500 miles from where I was at the time. And there was a freak accident. Horse suddenly reared up at night and kicked her in the head. But the first thing that was quite remarkable is that there were a load of witnesses, including a renal specialist from the University Medical Center, who all said that she was moving backwards as if something had dragged her by the back of her hair just before the horse connected. But, you know, scalp wounds bleed terribly and, you know, head injury. So she gets taken emergently to the medical center, and there's red stuff everywhere. And, you know, you're expecting the worst. Well, fortunately, there was no fracture, but she had other problems. It was at this moment that, well, I'm in Georgia trying to figure out how I'm going to get to Lexington, Kentucky, 500 miles at night, when Brad Nelson phones me for the first time in 18 months from St. George, Utah, and said, I just had a feeling I had to phone you. What's happened? Can I help you? And again, just think of that for a moment, Bernie. We had not spoken in 18 months. And he suddenly phones me at night with this. And he said, oh my goodness, well, let me see what I can do. Now, part of his method, he uses surrogates. Now, he's from an LDS family. He's got a gaggle of kids. So he said, do you mind if I treat your daughter? Which he did. So he treated her while he's sitting in St. George, Utah. She's in Lexington and I'm in Georgia. And he said, I've readjusted her spine because, you know, she'd been shook around an ambulance, all the other stuff. You know what emergency rooms are like. She'd been jostled hither and yon. And he said, oh, he says also a contusion on the kidney, and I've just fixed that. And I said, well, thanks, Brad. Well, she comes back. Everything is okay. We go to the chiropractor on the Monday morning. So this was all Saturday. Monday morning, go to see the chiropractor in Georgia, who says, everything's been fixed. What on earth has happened? How is it possible that somebody was life-flighted, then in an ambulance, then had all this, that, and the other, and there are no misalignments? He had treated everything from 2,000 miles away. And that's, I think, a remarkable example of a synchronicity, healing at a distance. And to me, it's an extraordinary case in lots of ways. And perhaps in a moment, we might talk a bit more about that. But I wondered if I might also ask your indulgence, because I'd like to give you a second case. There is a woman in England called Zabanu Gifford. She's a writer, she's a human rights campaigner, and she's an Indian of Zoroastrian origins. Now, the Zoroastrians are the original monotheistic religion, very ancient religion. She is extremely English, but she has done so much good around the world. She's was president of Anti-Slavery International, she's done so many things. A biography was written about her. And she continues now, although she must be into her 70s, doing a lot of work. But there's also another piece to this story. It discusses at some length how she has a medical condition, and it's all described in the books. I'm not giving away any confidences here. And it's in the hemophilia family. So she's occasionally got very, very ill. And I just wanted, if I may, to read you very briefly this little piece. She became ill from this hemorrhagic problem, was taken to the Royal Free Hospital. It's the main centre for haemophilia, and it's one of the best teaching hospitals in London. And it said, for all intents and purposes, Zubani was clinically dead. However, in her subconscious, she'd been catapulted to an alternative reality. Her entire being was awash with a sense of peace, and she felt incredibly free and light. The excruciating pain was replaced by the warm glow of a gold light that suffused her entire being with luminescence. It felt like being embraced by a sunbeam with a million specks of shimmering stardust. And it's amazing. Then she says, now I know what it is to die. I was cradled in a world where time and space seemed to vanish. It was an amazing feeling. I distinctly remember seeing an exquisite golden chariot being driven by Lord Krishna, the Hindu god, known as the embodiment of love and joy. I could feel his divine presence. I remember she's a Zoroastrian, she's not a Hindu. But I often used to visit the Hare Krishna temple in Letchmore Heath near London to meditate. And now being in this world, I could feel Lord Krishna's overwhelming, gentle presence. He enfolded me in an embrace, was holding me in front of him as he drove the chariot, whispering that I could not give up. I had still not gone into battle. I remember waiting to just collapse into his strength and close my eyes. It was bliss being there. But I felt him guide me back to life with the words, there is no time to rest. And doctors and nurses were stunned because they'd all given up on her. They'd actually told her husband, who obviously I know, that she had died. And she remains, she regained consciousness, blood count came back, and she said that she'd returned to the land of living because her destiny was to inspire the next generation of world leaders. That she felt was her job. But here's the last twist of this. There was a doctor friend of Zubani who's had a premonition at precisely the same time. He's also a Zoroastrian. He sensed that she was unwell and called to inquire after her health. He knew it was more than a coincidence. He had seen an inexplicable apparition of Zubanu being cradled in the arms of Lord Krishna in a gold chariot preparing to go into battle. There was no logical explanation for his vision. This occurred at precisely the same moment. How do I know this? Because the doctor in question was my best friend, and he was trying to get a hold of her and couldn't because she was on the way to hospital, and phoned me to say, I've just had this vision. What do you think it means? And what can we do? And so we discussed it. So we were actually dealing with this in real time. And she obviously did recover, and everything worked out. But this is, I think, a pretty remarkable story in every way, and the imagery in there. So those are two simple beginning examples, and then I'd like, if I may, to also talk a little bit more. But tell me, Bernie, because you have, in my view, probably collected more cases of synchronicities and coincidences than anybody that I know. So what do you think about those two examples?
The two examples of the healing at a distance with the chiropractor began with the chiropractor knowing something was wrong and making contact.
Exactly.
Well, that simulpathity is a form of telepathy, but more like a feeling than a thought. And so that kind of communication across space and time is common. Feeling the pain of a loved one at a distance is the most easily described one, because you have two people who know each other, and then you find out that that one felt this one, as happened as I described with my father, and I was choking uncontrollably, and he was choking and dying, bleeding into his own throat around the same time. That's where I came into that experience. People are picking up, there's all kinds of stories uh, of, and they've been collecting. Ian Stevenson collected a whole bunch of them in telepathic impressions. People would feel something, and then there would be a pain or a problem in someone else. However, the 18 months, I mean the mileage difference with the chiropractor so far away, picking it up about the the spinal column being thrown off, that's getting a little stranger because there's no reason, there's not a connection between the chiropractor and I guess it's your daughter-in-law.
Daughter, yeah,
Your daughter. I mean, there's a connection with you
yeah, but not with
and
her.
you. Well, she is connected with you, and you are, let me say, vibrating in what I will call a distressed state. Uh, and somehow he picks that up. And it's important to know that distressed states are forms of more intense communications so that somebody who's sensitive can pick it up. But just how that happens, I say the psychosphere, our mental atmosphere, is a medium through which this communication takes place. Some people will want to go to quantum mechanics and say it's quantum entanglement. I think that's too nice a metaphor and not accurate. I think this is a bigger thing. It's among people. Somehow there are communication channels always ready to be open, and emergency opens them up, and it kind of like knocks people on the head to say, there's something you got to do about it. But he's sensitive enough to pick it up. So you're describing a real phenomenon, and you describe it so beautifully in that story. I still go back to the mathematician who knew so much. And there's more that you're and how did he know it? And the physicians you've been talking about who know stuff, especially when Richard Petty is like walking around on the wards and kind of can't think about anything. And hit your default mode network, we could say, is turned off, or your left brain is turned off, or whatever it is. You're you're allowing stuff to come in. And the other day I was talking with one of my patients and I said, I can feel the Presbyterian rigidity in your body right now. And
Yeah,
he says, how do you know? I said, I don't want to try to tell you. I experience it. It was something that I
yeah.
felt of him. It's an empathic physiological that I could do with him. And that's what the thyroid one was. That's what you were doing, picking up things. You weren't being separate Richard. You are being
Yeah.
Richard with an expanded sense of self that we all have. And then you were able to pick up, I'm going to call it energy frequencies, which you could recognize and label as a diagnostic possibility. You can pick that up just as I was doing with this patient of mine. We have that ability and we've turned it off. And you are talking about being able to do it.
And I think that this turning off, the way that we have done that is actually a huge interest. And if I may, and although I think the second case I told you about, Zibanu Gifford, I mean, that also is kind of interesting, isn't it? Because again, they were not related, but they were good friends.
Yeah,
That he would pick up. But it was the specificity because he had already
yeah,
told me on the phone about that there she was being held by Lord Krishna in this wretched chariot. I mean, just
yeah.
extraordinary
The,
specificity.
it's the extraordinary specificity shows the capacity he and many of us have of being a kind of movie screen for input that we can then watch and report.
Yes, yes, and I think that the biggest problem was, um, like you, I teach people how to do some of these things, and the most important thing is just letting go,
Yeah,
letting go of the moment people start saying, um, that's how much they want to do this. I want to be a healer. If you start from that position, it's probably not going to work very well. You need to actually be able to take a step back and let it go. When somebody says, "Well, what's in it for me?" Yeah, probably we've got another job for you. That's probably not going to be the best thing for you to be doing. But I think what you said is absolutely right, that we have got extremely bad um, at noticing things. I think the critical part, and it's something that comes through in your book all the time, and it's something that you and I have discussed privately, and also on the previous time that we discussed on the podcast, is that a lot of this is a matter of, number one, attention, and the second is awareness.
Yeah.
And I think our awareness has absolutely atrophied, and particularly with the development of tools. Um, and of course, this has been since the Industrial Revolution. It's got much worse. And I've been very interested for a long time now in the impact of electronics on people's ability to pick stuff up. There's something that in acupuncture and qigong. Now, not every acupuncturist knows this, and I've heard some people really push back against it. Well, I didn't know that, and I'm saying, well, isn't it a good thing you came to class then? Well, I've never heard it before. The answer is, if I'm just doing acupuncture for a stiff neck, it doesn't matter what you do, you can stick a needle and trigger point, that's easy. But if I'm doing something more precise and specific, I make sure that there's no electronics around at all. I don't allow electronics in the room. You take your smartwatch off, no phones. In fact, it's a lot like when you go into, I've been in literally, I'm not exaggerating, say hundreds of MRI scans for research purposes. So, you go through this entire protocol where you get rid of everything. Well, we do the same thing when we're doing acupuncture or when we're teaching qigong or tai chi. And if you do that, the abilities get much better, because good acupuncture is all about the interaction between the therapist and the patient. It's not just, I'm doing this to you. When you talk about the Presbyterianism, yes, I also have had this experience so many times of picking stuff up, and people are sometimes quite freaked out by it. How the hell do you know that? Well, sorry, I try not to say things most of the time so I don't freak you out. But of course you pick it up because it's an interaction. And if you're any good at therapy, there's a very interesting area that's not widely known, is that there's actually data on healing that has been collected of all people by drug companies. And that's probably going to shock you. Because when drug companies are doing double-blind studies, they keep indices of all the centers, and there are some centers that have much higher placebo response rates than others. I happen to know that there's one particular center that's done a number of pharmaceutical studies where the placebo response rates were consistently over 60%. And so it wasn't that anybody was doing anything fishy, because you can't in the studies. It was because the practitioners in said clinic are super enthusiastic, work very hard, and do a lot of other stuff, which makes it difficult to do the studies. I won't tell you where that particular study center was, where they had 60% placebo response rates, but
Oh, you got to tell me. You got to tell me. Maybe
Atlanta,
later.
Georgia. No, this is public record, so I'm not
Yeah.
giving away anything. No, it was our center, and that's why we
Our
had
center that had anything to do with Richard Petty, maybe?
yes,
Yeah,
and
yes.
she who must be obeyed, which is my wife, who incidentally was also looked at as a hands-on healer at one point. It's another story that I'll tell you one day
Okay.
offline. The thing is that this electronics thing the interaction is quite something. And I'd actually like to just share something that I told you privately, but I'm happy to disclose. I'm very lucky that I'm an extremely fit and healthy person, knock on wood. A few days ago, started getting fatigue, and it was just fatigue. I'd just been running around and been all over the place doing things, and had some very vague symptoms. But what then happened was that all of our electronics started crashing, all our batteries on all the equipment. And because we have a lot of equipment around, not when I'm treating, but other places have got lots of electronics, all the batteries started draining, including when I got in my car, the battery, a new battery in my car, drained, completely empty. Headphones, computers, Wi-Fi. You were communicating with me and didn't get, for the first time, you said, you've been doing this for a long time, your podcast. You sent stuff, I sent it to you, you didn't get it. That's never happened before, you said. So all of this happened. And what was interesting was I thought, well, I know what's wrong. So I did a little bit of this, that, and the other to deal with my energy problem. And lo and behold, felt absolutely fine. And car battery gets better. All the batteries start perking up again, start charging them. Everything's fine. Everything's solved. You get the stuff I send you. I mean, that is a remarkable interaction between electronic equipment and a person. But that is why I'm always very careful about having electronics around, because I think that our awareness and attention are being damaged. I've done a lot of work recently on the interaction of social media and particularly young people. And I've done some lecturing on this topic. And there are two aspects to it. One is the content, which is horrible. The second is the machines themselves. I didn't know about you, Bernie, but I am now limited in the number of hours that I can spend in front of a computer screen. And I desperately need to go outside afterwards and decompress and get my electronics sorted. So I'd like to just lead on from that, because one of the many things I teach people is that the good side of electronics is bioelectricity. And I teach people as part of therapy earthing exercises. And one of them is you find yourself a happy, convenient tree. You put your left hand against it and against the bark, and you lean against the tree. You ask permission, by the way. I always ask the tree. It sounds wacky. I'm not a hippie tree hugger, but so lean against the tree, put the right hand over just below your navel, and you just lean against it. And it's quite remarkable. I have done this with patients. I was chief medical officer of a hospital where we had a quadrangle with 4 trees. I had patients on each of the 4 trees all the time during break sessions, all earthing themselves. And we did meds, we did therapy, we did everything else. Remarkable. But you have a very interesting story about trees as well, do you not?
Yeah. Yes, I do.
So, because I think it's very pertinent what I've just said. And, before we started, we were also talking about this very recent um, discovery that was just made. It was only published in the last week or two about trees in Switzerland that were able to sense before an eclipse occurred. Well, this doesn't surprise me because everything in nature makes predictions all the time. But tell us about the king and the queen.
that Before I get to the king and the queen, I want to mention you and electronics. That this you are describing evidence of your bioelectric magnetic field having a strong influence on many things around you,
Yes.
including markers, which are the batteries of your car and other things in the house. And that's an important thing I'm learning about you. When you tell me that, those are like phenolphthalein telling me if it's acid or base. This is like you telling me by these outside responses to you that you are having impacts more than I have, and I've had some on electronics. I got mad at at my computer and went to the Best Buy to get it fixed, and the tape changer, the CD changer on my 6-changer CD thing on my car just started messing up because I was so mad. And then after I got unmad, the thing started behaving itself. That we are much more connected to our machines than we think. they are too part of our environment. And these machine responses to your feeling not so good are telling me much more clearly how your bioelectromagnetic field, I'll say, influences the electromagnetic behaviors of these things out there. And that's something about you with acupuncture, your recognition of energy among and between people, your ability to feel, get the chiropractor to tune into you. You're actually telling me in a kind of Rorschach kind of way about what you are as a vibrating human being. And that's an important part for me to know about you as I learn from this, the functioning and intensity and capacity of your bioelectromagnetic field.
If I may, there's a story I didn't think I've shared. There was a woman in Philadelphia who's, in my opinion, she's not with us anymore, sadly. She was one of the finest homeopaths in North America,
Finest
specialized
what?
in
Finest what?
homeopaths,
Hmm.
uh, and she specialized in kids. And on Sundays, she used to come over to discuss difficult cases with me when I was first in the US. And that she was unable to be around computers. She would crash them. And so we actually did a fun experiment, and we discovered her range was about 17 feet. And we could move computers around. We moved her around, did blind, all the stuff a good scientist would do, and figured out it was 17 feet. One day she crashed computers 7 times in one day. And so, but because of that, most homeopaths these days use computers for doing what's called repetization, finding the right remedy. And she wouldn't. So she would use a notepad and then write her notes and then research the case, which she did with books, not with computers. And there was one very famous occasion when she saw a child who had alopecia, complete loss of hair, whole body. And so she took the case, wrote in the margin the remedy that she thought she was going to use. Went home, got her books out, found she was right about which remedy, but was a little bit surprised when mother of the kid phoned because she would then research the case and then the office would mail out the remedy to the child. Well, she hadn't got that far yet because mother phoned to say that after the appointment, hair started sprouting all over his head and his eyebrows. That's kind of interesting. And, that's actually also one of the reasons that research in some of what I call information medicine, like homeopathy and Reiki and Qi and all this, has sometimes been difficult because the way that they work is acausal. There's no way that a super dilute homeopathic remedy can work causally to produce a result. Some people therefore say it must all be garbage. Well, actually, that's not what the research says. It does seem to work in some very specific situations. Um, and it's because it's an acausal connecting principle. But it was very intriguing how this woman, 17 feet was a range, otherwise, bam, out went the computers. But she, again, was evidently that this child's hair starts sprouting. She must be actually doing some form of healing with the kid.
Yeah, it's acausal connecting is a fig leaf for ways to explain that we have yet not gotten to. And
Exactly.
to me, it's some kind of healing energy that some of us have. You walk into the presence of someone like you, and just your presence makes placebo responses go better. Uh, it it just there's a I don't know why it's so hard to be able to say it, but it's the more harmonic your resonance frequencies are, the more other frequencies can harmonize with those resonance. And that kind of resonance upgrade tends to be of a healing variety. There are many ways in which we can do that with each other. And you have that ability. And you may want to blame it on certain things, but you bring something that your electronics can't avoid you knowing because the evidence is right there. Richard, when you're off, we're off. When you're on, you're on. And I mean, that's you can't get away from that. So those are markers. Those are diagnostic tests. As is when you were sick and you could pick up stuff. There's information floating around and responses of others to us that is very real. And part of the new vision I am trying to create, the new movie for humanity, is to really tune into and accept that our interpersonal energy has impacts on each other as well as ourselves. And being able to communicate through interpersonal energy, not just these clumsy ways of using, what do they call these words things? They're kind of like relative grunts compared to the smoothness of communication that can be done through energy fields and through telepathy. We need to upgrade our community, our communion, all those things, communication things with each other as part of what I'm seeing as the new movie of the future. And you've got more. I mean, you got some special stuff, and I like knowing about it because I do, as we were talking about before, I get into some things with trees, as you have, and I love these trees, and I don't hug them, I don't touch them because they're too far away. They're down a steep hill, uh, and I just don't go down there. But a friend of mine went down there. She's crazier than I am, and barefoot, and she was hugging these trees, and I couldn't get her away from them. She was hugging the king, she was hugging the queen, and she was just getting all kinds of. So I had to sing a song to get her away from there because one of the other variables I have with the trees is they love me to sing to them. Why do they love me to sing to them? Well, an anthropology friend of mine said they don't make that vibration, so they're able to get it from you, and they give you a different vibration than you're able to give them. They,
Yeah, okay. I can roll with that one.
that reminds me, I got to sing the song I sang for her. It's an old song you may not have heard. It's called Earth Angel, and I used to sing that a lot, and I haven't sung that for a while, so I'm going to go back and sing that to them. They tend to like Somewhere Over the Rainbow. That's their favorite. Uh,
Oh my goodness gracious. I'm going to think up lots of different songs that trees might like.
they have to
Would
be
they like
ones you
songs
really.
by, would they be songs like Muddy Waters? Would he?
Yeah, well, the Earth Angel has got sky in there, and Over the Rainbow has definitely got sky and rainbows in it. And the second one they like is like um, called Over the Mountain, or the Mountain it's called, and it's the lovers in the mountain because it's on a mountain, and so it resonates with where they are. That and it's just not, well, I could talk about the trees for quite a while, but I think the energy of the trees
Yeah.
is what we're both talking about. And
Yes.
I'll stop this part of it to say that really, Bernie, how did you start these communications with the trees, with these trees, particularly
Mhm.
these two trees? And I was just like walking along in this place with a lot of trees. It's in the 20 minutes from here. Just walking along, I like being in the forest, and like this beam came across the path. Like, oh, I go like this. And I look to my left, that's my left, and there's these two trees standing there. And I said, oh, okay. So something happened. I don't remember now. So that every time I go up there, I pay a visit to them. And various things happen. Some days I need to bow down to them. More recently, I am able to stand up with them. I become more like them. I've become a tree sometimes with them. Then they, I don't know how it happened, but they said, "Hey, there's another one here." And here were these two trees, and right behind both of them, in between from where I was seeing, was another one. So there are really three of them, and I didn't see the third one till 5 or 6 years later. So now it's three of them, and every once in a while we get into dancing with each other, and I dance with the trees, and we do the rhombus because we're shaped like this. So there's all kinds of the idea the Japanese have of bathing in the forest.
Oh yes, forest bathing. Yeah,
Forest bathing, it's so important because
yeah.
almost every time I feel better after I've immersed myself with the trees.
I absolutely believe it. I think that we all of us live in this what some people call a hidden ecology, um, and which we have to see from multiple perspectives. And if all you're trying to do is use what you just said, the words coming out, your grunts, it's very difficult to understand those. It's not until you let go enough that you can actually pick up what on earth is going on here. Um, and see
What on earth?
different, yes, and I use that term deliberately. That wasn't
Yes,
a sort
I
of
like to underline it. Yes.
pun. Because I think that consciousness and cosmos they can't be separated. I think I started off by saying that part of our problem is that the way the world is and the way we see it and describe it are out of sync, and that's what's leading to such an enormous number of problems for everyone. The other thing is that I think when you get these electromagnetic effects, I think that's a part of it. I think the electromagnetism is secondary to something else, which I might say if you're interested.
Yeah, I
But
am. I am.
the healing effects, the effects that you get on yourself are actually more than just feeling better. They actually produce change when it's done like that. When you were working with somebody and you said you could pick up the Presbyterian there, um, that sort of thing produces change. We talk a lot about synchronicities producing ontological shock. And I think for people not so familiar with it, this idea that there are fundamental forces in the world, and most of us just ignore them. And some people get on with life perfectly well and say it doesn't matter to know any of this. And my response to that is to say, actually, it does, because we're all frying. We're doing very badly. The world is going in completely the wrong direction. And it's because most of us are oblivious to what's going on. The fact that you can actually let go enough to let the trees talk to you, I think is a big thing. Although I'm beginning to wonder now, are they trees or are they ents? You remember the ents from Lord of the Rings?
No.
Oh, tree herders. Oh,
Ah.
oh, one day I'll tell you. But no, they're actually quite a crucial part of the Lord of the Rings.
Oh.
Is the Ents are um, the shepherds of the trees, and they are very ancient and very special. So, as I said, I think things like synchronicities, like consciousness, um, like meaning, they're all fundamentals. I think a mistake that people sometimes make is to say that meaning is something that is purely psychological. I don't believe it is. I think it's meaningful when two hydrogen molecules meet an oxygen and make water and actually transform and emerge something completely different. That is meaningful. And when we talk about it as psychological, I think we're just putting a construction on it. One of the hypotheses that has attracted my attention most recently is this dual aspect monism. I mean, it's a very old idea, but the idea that psyche and matter are simply two different aspects of something underlying. And I tend to see it slightly more that way, simply because interesting that I mentioned the Krishna with Zibanu, that case a moment ago. In the Bhagavad Gita and in Shankara philosophy, they talk a great deal about Purusha and Prakriti, which is basically the same idea of dual aspect monism. So the way I see that synchronicities and meaning all emerge from this monad underneath, and that's why it can come out in psyche and it can come out in real stuff. It's why it can make me feel sick and drain all my batteries at the same time.
Well, it's so Jungian, actually, the dual aspect monism. It's the same idea
Yes, it is.
Jung
Yes,
had.
and
And what I do, Richard, with ontologies like that is say, I think there's like we only know 5% of the universe, maybe dark energy, dark matter, and who knows what else is out there. That I'm deeply respectful of our ignorance,
yes,
and that we these arguments about what is actually going on in a kind of ontological big sense are not as relevant as what is practical about a theory or a model of how reality works that we can now use as we face the frog that's slowly being boiled, that we are and not paying enough attention to it. So the thinking outside of our regular materialism is more where I tend to want to go. But I think this mathematician idea of the Indian mathematician who at age 16 just got
Ramanujan, yes,
I mean I mean, that's real. I mean, they gave him a rough time at Oxford. He just wasn't accepted. They couldn't believe what he was doing, and it made it rough on him. And it was too bad because he was able to come up with stuff, and he didn't even really know how, but it was just what he was doing. He was channeling, we'll say, information that's out there. That's an important ontological description. That's an
yes,
important,
completely agree. Yeah,
that's pointing to that there's information out there that we have access to if we are open enough to it. I'll call it simple examples of you being sick and picking up information about patients. Those are relatively simple relative to what we need to do now. They're very important. They're hints, but we need to be able to open up globally to the information that each of us can pick up, like the mathematician coming up with ideas that who knew where they were coming from, but they are very useful. We need collectively to gather people with information sources that each mind has a potential connection to and begin to find ways to put that together in a matrix of understanding that allows us to create a movie of the future for humanity to not be destroying our environment, our ecosystem, to become part of the ecosystem. You mentioned Gregory Bateson, who's such a character, who who could be said have said the African phrase, "I, I am because you are, because we are together in this," or the Beatles, "I am you and we are me and we are together," or something. We're- We are all in this together, and together some of us can have access to that kind of mathematical place that he stumbled upon because he was ignorant. That really helped. And he was open somehow and was was enough in his own religion, I'm guessing, to say there's more there. And he got it into him. How do we find people who can collect pieces of information so each of us has a piece of a puzzle that can create a movie, at least a script for a movie, for our vision of a new future, rather than the future that Revelations has predicted for a great deal of the world, with Christianity's influence on the way people think about the future.
you see, I think a lot of it. You normally start getting this information when you need it.
That
Um,
helps.
you know, I mutual friend, David Lorimer, has for decades been follower of Peter Dunov, who's a Bulgarian sage. And there's a very interesting story that during the Holocaust, Bulgarian Jews were not taken away. And the reason was that the Tsar of Bulgaria was in hiding. And somebody said maybe he could intercede and stop the Nazis doing what they were doing, but we can't find him. So they went to see Peter Dunov, who went into another room and came back a couple of minutes later and said he's in Kharkov. Was able to say they went off and saw him, and the Tsar said, "You're not taking any Jews from Bulgaria." And if you actually look at the statistics, it's one of the few countries that survived because of that, the Bulgarian Jewry. And David actually documents that in one of his books. And there are other examples like that. I may have mentioned once about a Polish patient who came running along, was very, very distressed, spoke not a word of English. While the translator was parking the car, he came in and started gabbling away. And translator then comes in and says, I didn't know you spoke Polish. No, not a single word. You sounded like somebody from Warsaw. No, I don't speak a single word of it. Then she chipped in and never spoke another word of Polish in my life. The poor man needed help. I don't know. So apparently I gabbled away in Polish to him for 5 minutes. I don't know. But I think that's a perfect example of just need. And I think as the need increases, more people are able to access more things that are required for exactly what it is that you're suggesting. That's my view. I don't think we're quite critical enough yet. That's why not more people know. And I think
we're quite critical enough for some of us. We're quite critical enough for some of us.
Yeah, I would accept that.
And I think you're one of them that can tune into like where the Tsar of Bulgaria is kind of thing. Like, what's the movie of the future that you, Richard Petty, are starting to see that can be a way of helping humanity reverse its awful narrative?
I think what we're actually doing is a very crucial part of it, because a lot of people verbalize beliefs. It's a bumper sticker thing. Oneness is stuck on the back of one of your hippies' cars. It's not until you actually feel that. And the idea of the interconnection is not beads on a string, but it's actually real interconnection. And I think until people feel that and are able to let go of themselves a little bit, that they're part of the world, but not in it, if you want. They're not seduced by it. Once that starts happening, then change happens very quickly. And, I tend to be overly very optimistic. I've been a very keen student of history. If I hadn't done medicine, I would have taught history, I'm quite sure. I've always loved it. I don't think anybody could have predicted the fall of the Berlin Wall when it happened, and how quickly it all happened. And there are several other recent examples like that. Everybody thought it was completely intransigent problem, and I could name several others, but I won't, of very sudden changes. And I think it is when there's sudden changes in the psyche. I don't think it's just people protesting on the streets. I think it's when there's a sudden shift in how people see the world, then things do change. I think one of the terribly overworked terms is paradigm shift. I don't like that term because Thomas Kuhn himself, who coined the term, uses the word paradigm in, I think, 28 different ways. So, it gets overworked. But I think when there's a sudden shift in understanding, but more than understanding, it's an understanding that's made up of reason, science, intuition, and imagination. When we just begin to feel the world different. That's, Bernie, one of the things that I often talk about, the differences between feeling, affect, emotion, and mood. When you start feeling things different, then things change. So if you ask what's the movie, it produces feelings. And if you change feeling, then you start getting the other stuff following along from it, in my opinion.
I agree. The feeling change leads to a movie. The feeling drives the movie in my personal experience. I just noticed that a couple of weeks ago. Had a feeling I saw a movie. Uh, it's emotion, emotion. And what's emotion? Move from. It gets you
Yes.
going. It gets you going. So emotion is an emotion in the heart. And what's the emotion of the heart? The emotion of the heart is love in its many forms.
Well, I don't think anybody would dispute that one. Um, but again, the only thing why I'm a stickler here is that I would say it's not emotion, it's feeling, because I think they're different things. You see,
Eh,
when we say, and why I want you to be, no, sorry, I sound like a
yeah,
bloody schoolmaster here,
you
but
are. You are.
um, but
It's feeling. It's feeling. Emotion is a
the
label we
reason
give to the
the
feeling.
reason though,
Yeah.
Bernie, is why I say that is because emotion is when you start having cognitive elaboration
Yes.
of the feeling.
Yeah.
And, you can use therapy to help with emotion and mood problems. You're going to be hard pressed to change feelings just with therapy alone because feelings haven't yet begun to elaborate. So that's why I think they're as a slightly different remove.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I agree. I agree.
I
I.
I have a story that it's nothing like as dramatic as yours with your dad.
And then
Um,
we'll have to stop.
of course, when I was 6 months old, um, my mother suddenly got a flash. She was in another room. She'd given me a piece of banana to eat, and I choked on it. And so she got this flash. Mothers around the world have reported this for millennia. Came running in, and I'd already turned blue and stopped breathing, and she lifted me up. But the interesting result of that is throughout my life, I've had what is called in science a conditioned taste aversion. Since I was 6 months old, I've never been able to eat a banana. It's quite different from other kinds of reflexes, but that is a very profound feeling and it stays with you throughout life. And that's the difference between somebody doing a motivational program and an inspirational program. You go to a Tony Robbins thing, 3% of people are different by Tuesday. You go to something which is inspirational, which affects your feelings, 60, 70, 80% of people change. That's my last thought. Bernie, it's been a pleasure and congratulations again on the new book.
Thank you very much, Richard, and thank you for your wonderful review and your comments on it.